Welcome to this video on constructing a confidence interval for one proportion with a summary. Let's begin. Suppose you are conducting a survey in a city to understand voter preferences in an upcoming election. You are interested in estimating the proportion of voters who support a specific candidate, candidate A. You randomly select 500 voters and ask them if they plan to vote for candidate A. Of the 500 respondents, 280 say they plan to vote for candidate A, while 220 say they will vote for another candidate. Calculate a 98% confidence interval for the proportion of voters in the city who support candidate A. Before we go to RGuroo, let's first identify the variables that RGuroo is going to want. So the first thing it's going to want is the sample size n. Then it's going to ask us to define success. So in this example, we have to determine what outcome are we calling success and we have to do that before we can figure out the number of successes. And then lastly, we have to identify the confidence level. So as you can see, the sample size is 500 because we selected 500 voters to sample. Then we are defining success as people who voted for candidate A. And the problem says that 280 people voted for candidate A. Notice we are given this information that 220 people said that they were voting for another candidate, and we're not actually going to end up using that piece of information. So just remember, sometimes you're given more information than you actually need. And last but not least, we are asked to construct a 98% confidence interval, so the confidence level is 98%. So this is the information that we will be feeding into our software. So when you log into RGuroo, your screen should look something like this. So we're going to come over to the accordion menu. We're going to select Analytics and Analysis, and then we're going to go to Proportion, Inference, and One Population. So we don't have a data set, we have a summary, so we're going to fill out the summary information. So remember, we said we have 500 voters that we surveyed, 280 of them said they were voting for candidate A. So if we come down here, you can see that it talks about confidence interval, which is what we're interested in. And we're going to change our confidence interval to 98%. Now at this point, it probably really seems like we should be done, but there's a few more things we have to do. The first thing is we have to tell the computer which test to use, and we're going to use a large sample Z. And again, it really seems like if I press this I should get an output, but it wants a factor label. So we have to fill this in. So I'm just going to say votes here. And then it also is going to make me fill in a success label. And if you don't believe me, I'll show you. See, it says success label is missing. That's my error. So I will say votes for candidate A. Okay, and notice as I type here, it also fills in this field next to proportion of. So finally, after doing all of that, it should give me the output. So let's see if we can understand what RGuroo is telling us. So with our confidence interval, we have a lower and upper limit. So this is my lower limit, this is my upper limit. And it also gives me the width and the midpoint. Let's see if we can take our RGuroo output and convert it into an actual confidence interval. So remember, a confidence interval consists of several parts. So you have your lower limit and your upper limit. Halfway in between those, you have a point estimate, and the distance from the lower limit to the point estimate is the margin of error, and it's also the distance from the point estimate to the upper limit. So let's see if we can figure out what were the lower and upper limits. So we saw those in RGuroo. Remember, the lower limit was about 0.51, and as you can see, the directions say round all values to the nearest percent. So I'm rounding this to 51%. And then the upper limit was 61%. But what about the point estimate? Did RGuroo give us a point estimate? Let's look. So here's RGuroo, and again, the lower limit, I rounded this to 51%. I rounded that to 61%, so that's where the lower and upper limit came from. The midpoint is the point estimate, so this is going to go in the middle of our confidence interval. So this is the point estimate. So the point estimate is 56%. But now what about the margin of error? Well, just looking at this picture is pretty straightforward to calculate. For example, 61% minus 56% is 5%. Likewise, 56% minus 51% is 5%. So just with this information alone, we could simply calculate the margin of error. But let's look at our RGuroo output one more time and see if we can see this information anywhere in that output. So the only other piece of information that's kind of like the margin of error is the width, and that is actually twice the margin of error. So your options are to either calculate the margin of error manually, the way I just explained, or to take this width and divide it by 2. So if you take the width and divide it by 2, that will give you your margin of error. So last but not least, now that we have constructed our confidence interval, let's summarize our findings. So we would say that we are 98% confident that the true population proportion of voters who support candidate A lies between 51 and 61%.